Hello and welcome to Archive Dive. I'm digital producer Dan Williamson, filling in for Maria Lockwood for this month's episode. Each month, the Superior Telegram dips into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County. This is the first part of a two-part series looking back at the life of the legendary Bud Grant. Born Harry Peter Grant Jr. on May 20th, 1927 in Superior, Grant is remembered as a Hall of Fame coach who guided the Minnesota Vikings for 18 seasons, including 4 Super Bowl appearances. On March 11, 2023, Grant passed away at the age of 95. May 21st, the day after what would have been his 96th birthday, numerous friends, fans, and family members memorialized him at a public celebration of life at US Bank Stadium. The Vikings' first NFL season was in 1961, and Grant would become the team's head coach in 1967, retiring in 1983, but coming out of retirement for one more season in 1985. In 1994, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. 2023 marks the first Vikings season since 1966 without Grant directly connected to the team, either as the head coach, former coach, or consultant. The Vikings were a big part of an amazing life filled with athletic achievements, but there was much more to his life than football. What he was most passionate about, though, was a large family. Bud and his wife Pat had 6 children, and from there, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. One of his granddaughters is a familiar face to the Northland. Earlier this year, Natalie Grant accepted a position as a reporter and multimedia journalist for KXLY-TV, the ABC affiliate in Spokane, Washington. But for 4 years, she was an anchor and reporter at Duluth-based Northern News Now. Just weeks after her grandpa's passing, and just before heading west to begin her new career adventure, Natalie sat down with us to share special stories and memories of her grandpa Bud. Here is that interview. You are a granddaughter.
Yes, the granddaughter of Bud Grant. And
people that are seeing this would be familiar with you from the television airwaves. You were a news anchor at NNN?
Yes, so Northern News Now, I was most recently a morning news anchor over there and about to start a new career journey.
Oh, in Spokane, Washington.
Yes, Spokane, Washington.
And then home for you?
So I graduated from Eden Prairie High School. I grew up kind of in the western suburbs area, down in the Twin Cities. But yeah, I graduated from Eden Prairie.
Well, I know as we're recording this, we're still just a couple of weeks out from a tough day for your family and just so many people out there. What was your grandpa like?
It's a big question. He was grandpa to me, honestly. He was a stoic guy, but he also loved to smile and loved to laugh. He loved his family more than anything. But yeah, for me, he was just grandpa. I was born in 1996, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame a couple of years before that. So I kind of missed my lifetime of him being this big NFL coach in a sense. And so to me, I didn't quite realize how big of a deal he was to the state of Minnesota until I was a lot older. It was something that in our family, we weren't very boastful about it. When I went to grandpa, he never talked about football. He wasn't someone that when you walked in the room, he started talking about the last Vikings game or the last Packer game or whatever it was. If you just met him on the street, you probably wouldn't even know that he was as successful as a coach as he was. Just because he always said life isn't about football. It was his job and it was his career, but it didn't rule his entire life in a sense. So to me, he was always just grandpa, someone we saw at Christmas and at Eden Prairie High School football games. When I was graduating from high school, he was always down in the end zone area. I was performing at the band at halftime, and we would always walk by grandpa sitting in the end zone there while my uncle was coaching. So those are kind of the big things I remember of my grandpa is just he loved his family more than anything. There's nothing in this world that brought him more joy than spending time with us, or there's so many of us, and just getting in that one-on-one time as much as possible.
You touched upon my next question. People probably assume that football was a constant conversation, but that wasn't the case.
No, not at all. I just, talking with my family over these last couple of weeks, that was something that we just kept bringing up, is the fact that he never talked about football. When you're around him, it wasn't like football was the primary subject of all your conversations. It was very much hunting and fishing and outdoors. And he loved telling stories about his time up here in the Northland and his outdoor adventures up here and his time growing up in Superior. He wasn't a football fanatic. He didn't walk in and hear all the things about the football games that he watched that day. He'd watch football and he enjoyed it. And if you asked him about it, he'd talk about it with you, but it wasn't a subject that he brought up on his own ever.
I want to ask you about his days growing up in Superior. I know those were a few years before you were even thought of. He talked a lot about growing up in Superior and what life was like.
Absolutely. So I think that that's something that my grandpa and I really connected on. Whenever I would go visit him out at his cabin in Gordon, we'd sit and we'd talk, and he'd share stories about growing up in Superior and how the city looked a lot different than it did now. And he'd talk about his buddies and him going down to the lake, and they'd hunt for smelt. And he'd always say that was your dinner that night. And if you didn't catch any fish, then you weren't eating. And that's just how it was back then. He talked about how his dad owned a bar on Tower Avenue. And so he spent a lot of time kind of growing up in that atmosphere. But when he was young, he made a little business out of himself, and he would deliver papers, and he had a paper route, and he'd go to all the different businesses and the clubs and the bars and the areas on Tower Avenue there. He had his own little paper route where he rode his bike. And that was one of his biggest memories that he always talked about whenever he talked about Superior. He came from nothing. He was not raised in a wealthy area. He definitely was someone who had to work for all his success and everything that he got. And that's why he was so frugal in his life. That's why he had things like the garage sales at a later age. And he wasn't flashy by any means of things. And I think that's just because of his beginnings and growing up in kind of a poor area. He always talked about Duluth being the swanky place across the lake, and you'd go across the bridge and it would be the trolleys, and those were all the fancy rich people lived. But in Superior, they had to work a little harder, he always said. So it was something that we definitely connected on, but it was what made his love for northern Wisconsin. And that's why he came back and he got space in Gordon out there where our cabin is. So he definitely had a love for this area that was really special.
I'm not sure about his children, but obviously you and some cousins found your way to Duluth and the area. I imagine he was proud of everyone, but do you think in some way that was special to him, knowing that members of the family ended up in his home area, so to speak?
Yeah, in a sense, I think that he was proud of all of us in very different ways. He went to the University of Minnesota down in the Twin Cities, and so he was a Gopher all his life down there. But my dad was actually the first of the Bulldogs in our family. I think there's 8 or 9 of us now that have come up here in Bulldogs. My dad was the first one, called himself the original Bulldog. And then I had aunts, and my stepmom went up here, and my cousins. And I have a cousin who's a freshman there right now. He's the most recent. And I think that growing up and coming up here as kids, going to the cabin and being up in northern Minnesota, I think it's given us a certain appreciation for Duluth in a sense. And I know when my dad was playing, he played under Molosky up at UMD. He was quarterback there. And my grandpa would always go up and go to games. And I know that he went to my cousin's soccer games and football games up here because most of us were involved in some kind of a sport when we were up here. So I don't know if it made him proud necessarily, but I think it was probably kind of cool for him to see us back up here and loving the place that he loved growing up.
And for those unfamiliar, your dad is?
Bruce Grant. He passed away back in 2018 now. And he was a quarterback under Jim Molosky. He played football for a while up there. And yeah, he passed from brain cancer and glioblastoma.
Yeah. For you personally, and maybe speaking on behalf of the other cousins who ended up here, what was the appeal of Duluth, knowing that you probably had college options down in the metro?
Yeah, I mean, I always knew I was going to Duluth. I didn't tour any other schools, if I'm being honest, just because Duluth felt like home. Duluth has always felt like home to me. Going up here, we'd walk down the hallways, and my dad would show me Bohannon 90. He'd walk me out to the football field, and you'd see Molosky's name over the top of it. And my dad always told Mo stories, is what he called them. And Duluth just felt like somewhere that I was supposed to be. And I don't know if I can't speak for any of my other cousins or anyone else that has been here, but when we all talk about Duluth, we talk about the amazing memories that we've had here and just what a beautiful area it is. And it's fun to kind of have that similarity between so many people of our family. We're the Bulldogs. We're a proud pack of them for sure.
You talked about how your grandpa was able to watch some of the family members play sports at UMD.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to think that you were the only one where he could turn the TV on and see you giving the nightly news. What was that like, knowing that Grandpa is in Gordon watching you on television?
It's a little nerve-wracking, to be honest. I'd go, he watched me in my very early days of being on air, and I like to think that I've gotten better over the years too, as we all have in TV, when we first start to our end. But he watched me a lot on the weekends. It was kind of fun. My cousins and my aunts and uncles would go up to the cabin, and they'd send me pictures of me doing the weekend news or doing a report, and he would never reach out directly and be like, "Great job, we watched you tonight." But when I was at the cabin, he'd kind of make little comments like, "Oh yeah, we watch you. Oh yeah, we see ya." And so it's like, oh, I always know Grandpa's watching if he's up there. But it was kind of fun to be able to know that he was there and offering support, because none of my other family lives up in this area, but my grandpa basically did for a good amount of the time that I was working here. So that was fun. But then when I moved to mornings, he's like, who gets up at that hour? So he didn't catch my morning shows very often.
That surprises me. I figured he'd be up fishing at the crack of dawn and then flip on the morning newscast.
Yeah, he liked silence. That's kind of one thing that I think a lot of people are surprised about, is I think he loved the beauty of nature. And him and his partner, Pat, at the end, she talked about how they would just enjoy comfortable silence together. Because when you're that old, he's like, listen more than you talk. He's like, you'll learn a lot more if you listen versus talking. And so we'd walk in and there'd be no music playing, the TV would be down low, but he'd be watching the birds and he'd be watching the lake and he'd just be taking in nature or reading the paper or reading a book. So he really enjoyed kind of that comfortable silence with people and just being at a place that he loved.
Just curious, did he get into technology? I mean, was he a texter?
No. I remember the Vikings did a Zoom call for, I think it was his birthday or someone else's birthday, where they got a bunch of the Vikings greats. I think it was his most recent birthday. And he was on a Zoom call and I was stunned. He never had a cell phone. We always tried to convince him to get a cell phone because he'd be out in the woods hunting and we're like, what if something happens to you? No, not a technology person at all. His partner, Pat, she was definitely more of the communicator in a sense in that way. So I think she was the one who got him on the Zoom call. But yeah, that was a huge shock to me when I saw that one there.
Now, the position he was in for so many years, he dealt with media a lot. I've never heard any stories where he had any issues with media, but how did he react when you said, Grandpa, I'm going to go into journalism. I'm going to be a news reporter?
Yeah, he was always very supportive of all of us in our different career paths. I mean, in my family, there's people in every facet of the sector. As you can imagine, there's almost 60 of us total in our family, and I'm the only one who does anything as far as journalism or broadcast media goes. And he didn't really have a huge reaction, I'd say, but his big thing was that, yep, you just got to get a job and you got to start making money for yourself, and it doesn't matter what it is, but you got to be self-sufficient. But it was always really cool growing up and seeing the interviews that my grandpa would do or seeing the interviews that my uncle would do. It was always very interesting, and they'd drop like personalities that are down in the Twin Cities. Like Mike Max was a very good close friend of my grandpa, and Sid Hartman obviously was a close personal friend of ours. And I wish that I would have taken that in maybe at a younger age to learn a lot from people like Sid about journalism. But yeah, I think he's proud of us no matter what we do, which is kind of cool.
Anybody that's at that age, you can't help but wonder, what is the secret to a long life? What tips do they have? Do you recall him ever sharing, how do you get to 95? And maybe a second part of this question, what was the best advice that he ever gave you?
I would say it was funny, actually. My uncle, during his funeral, gave a really nice speech, my Uncle Mike, and he touched on the fact of, to be the doctor of Bud Grant is a tall task, because he'll sit there and he'll tell you, oh, the reason I live so long is because I chew my food, or I don't eat a lot, or I don't know, like he had all these things that he would say that, I'm this old and I've made it this long because I watched nature and I got out in the sun, or things like that, which is kind of funny. But I think he just lived a very fulfilled life, and obviously he was very active throughout his entire life. And I don't remember him ever being sick in my my years, and even if he was, I don't think that he let any of us know about it, just because that was kind of his age that he grew up. You kind of just get through it and you tough it out and you go on to the next thing. And that got passed down to even like my dad. From playing football, he had a broken thumb at some point. He would never get it fixed. I'm like, why don't you get your thumb fixed? And it was that same mentality of, oh, it's fine. It'll heal itself. I don't want to go to the doctor and get it all fixed up for them to do nothing about it. Just those kind of things are just kind of his generation. But as far as the best advice that he's ever given me, I think it goes back to you learn more when you listen rather than talking. And that's something that I really try to apply in a lot of situations in my life, is especially being a journalist. When you stand back and you let people talk and you sit there and you listen rather than inputting your own opinions or inputting your own thoughts into things, that I think is something that has been really impactful for me in my life. He also, throughout his entire career, there's this quote that got thrown around with him talking about how the best leader is one that you wouldn't even know is there. And that's been really big for my life too, especially since he's passed. I've heard that quote so many different times talking about leadership and how the best one is when you're supporting your team and when you're supporting the people behind you and not necessarily making the whole thing about you, and the fact that your team could still succeed whether you were there or not, because at the end of the day, a leader is someone who is just able to kind of set the groundwork and watch a team flourish. And in the various leadership roles that I've had in my life, I wish I would have paid more attention to quotes like that sooner, because I think that would have been really impactful for me. And I hope to apply it to different areas of my life going forward too.
Yeah, grandparents are such special people.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 of mine are gone, and I miss them terribly. The difference is, though, your grandpa, I mean, in some ways, you shared your grandpa with the Viking fan base and the region. When did you know that grandpa was a big deal?
I think it was when I was in like early elementary school. I started to kind of figure it out a little bit. That I guess in my generation, a lot of kids never watched him growing up or anything like that. But it was when we went to sporting events, when we went to Vikings games, things along those lines, it kind of started to click for me. But it's been very cool this last couple of weeks just to see the outpouring of love and support. Because like I said, back in the day when he was coaching, I'm sure that was very prominent, but I never got to experience that side of Grandpa. I would see people show his love on his birthdays and whenever he had his garage sales and things like that. But it's been really cool to just see how much love there is in the state of Minnesota and beyond for him from Vikings fans or just Minnesotans in general. It was kind of surreal the day he passed, going on social media and just kind of seeing the outpouring of support from people, not only locally here, but Governor Tim Walz, Amy Klobuchar, big Vikings figures like Adam Thielen and coaches from across the country. It was amazing to see just how big his impact really was on our state as a whole. And I was talking to my cousin, who is a freshman at UMT, when we were heading down for the funeral, and we're learning a lot about Grandpa's legacy over these last couple of years too. There's a lot of campaigns that he did or a lot of interviews that he did where he talked about his family or he talked about experiences that he had during coaching that we just never really talked to him about because he never talked about coaching with us. He would talk about other things. So it's been kind of a learning curve a little bit to learn all these amazing things about him. But also it's been amazing just to see that the love that I have for my grandpa isn't just shared by our family. It's shared by so many people across the state. It's been pretty amazing.
Did you ever have the experience with him where maybe you're out for dinner and heads are turning and strangers approach?
Not that I remember specifically. I guess my memories with my grandpa are very centered around things like time up at the cabin in Gordon and holidays at his house or relative's house, or when he would come over for dinner at our house. We didn't really go out into a lot of public settings like that a ton, but I could imagine. I worked a couple of his garage sales. That was one of the biggest things that I remember. And I remember the last one that he had, I was security. At the end, I walked up to him and I said, "Grandpa, what can I do to help?" And he threw a yellow vest at me and he's like, "Go make sure people don't steal things." He's like, "Go stand at the bottom and make sure people don't take things without paying for them." But that was kind of one of the biggest, I guess, public situations I've been in with him, just the amount of people that would show up for these garage sales and the people that would come and shake his hand and talk to him. And Grandpa loved to sit there and talk, and he loved to know that his stuff that he had that was just things to him, or, I mean, they had a lot of memories and he appreciated all of his things, but he wanted to know where they were going. And I think that's why he held these garage sales, is because I remember there's this clip of him giving away one of his first guns that he ever, like a hunting guns. And he's signing it for this guy and he's telling the guy about the story of it. And I think as he was getting older, he wanted to see where his things were going, and he wanted to know that they were going to people who would appreciate them, because he had a lot of memorabilia in that house, from posters to bobbleheads to you name it. He had a ton of it. And while we as a family could have dispersed them among ourselves, I think he would rather have given them to people who would cherish them a lot and would have a memory behind them, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, I read that there was just a few things that he kept. I think one was a ball from his first Vikings victory, which happened to be over Vince Lombardi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things like that. He had all of his rings. He donated his bust. I think there's a big kind of area in the Vikings museum down at the new facility down there that has a bunch of those things. There's the sign that says Bud Grant Way. There's his Hall of Fame bust. There's his jackets. Things like that that are priceless. That's a great place for them to go. But he kept... As far as like the memorabilia goes, I have a copy of his signed book, and all of us have different footballs from him that he signed from different games. And he gave away the important things to the people that meant it. But the things that can't disperse among ourselves, I think I'm glad that they're off with other people. A funny story, actually, that happened last night. I was laying in bed and a guy messaged me on Facebook and he said, "Hey, Natalie, I have a table hockey set that I got at your grandpa's garage sale a couple years ago. I think he made it for you. Your name's on the bottom. Do you want it?" And I was like, what is he talking about? So I texted him, I was like, "Yeah, can you send me a picture of it?" And he sent me a picture of it. And it's a hockey table set that I made in 8th grade in shop class that my grandpa definitely did not make for me, but I had no idea that it ended up in the garage sale. I was like, "Oh, I know, you keep it. It'll be in good hands for you." But it's just kind of funny that people have memories with it, and they have memories of all these things that they get at those garage sales. And it's cool to see. I mean, just going on social media after he passed, there were so many pictures of people posting, "I got this at Bud Grant's garage sale, and I got this at Bud Grant's garage sale." And I think that those pieces mean a lot to all those people that were his fans, that really loved him and really loved watching him coach.
I have to ask, was the family at all concerned when these garage sales started happening? Because he was sharing his address out there, and you're thinking like, gosh, I hope somebody doesn't try to scam him or anything like that. But then again, if they did, he'd probably find them and make them do sprints in the front yard or something.
Yeah, exactly. It was a little nerve-wracking, I think, just because when they started, they were very small. I remember we were doing garage sales every summer when I was a kid. They were going on for a lot longer than when they were published. And there was as much coverage as they used to be. It used to be just kind of a regular garage sale. Everyone bring over stuff. The neighborhood would come. Signs would go out. It was very low key. But he started publishing them. And I think there was a little bit of a worry from our family, just like, I hope everything's okay. And I hope everyone's safe. And giving out your address like that in this day and age is a little nerve wracking. But back in his day, that wasn't something that he ever was concerned about, I think. But I think some of us in the family were kind of happy that they were done a little bit, just because we're like, okay, we're just finding things around our house to sell at that point. But I think he loved it because he got to interact with the people that would come to them. And he liked kind of that interaction with people. And he liked making money. He really liked making the money of all of it, which was kind of fun. But they were good memories to look back on too. Like our family, we would all get together and we would have different stickers that would note different families and what we're selling and all that kind of stuff. So it's fun.
Another thing I have to ask about in terms of the family reaction is that playoff game at TCF Bank Stadium in January of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a scene. He's walking out there in a short sleeve shirt.
Yeah.
We're not the family, though. Are you guys thinking, Grandpa, you're nuts? It's whatever the temp was that day.
No, he's built Minnesota strong. I mean, I don't know if we were necessarily worried, but I remember that day I was old enough to have a cell phone. I was old enough to be on social media on that day. And I remember my text just blowing up with people texting me pictures, saying that my grandpa's just amazing and a true figure of Minnesota. And I remember there was an interview that my uncle did where he talked about this. And he said that he was the one who drove him to the game that day. And Grandpa goes, yeah, I think I'm going to go in a short sleeve shirt out for the coin toss. He's like, what do you think about that? And my uncle goes, I think the crowd will love it. I think everyone will go nuts. And they definitely did. But that was him in a nutshell. He wouldn't let his players have those heaters. He wanted to showcase the fact that we were from the Great North. We could play in the cold temperatures. And that was just, I think, is like the ultimate symbol of Minnesota Viking football, is him walking out in that short sleeve shirt. And people still talk about it to this day. Anytime they bring up that they find out that my grandpa is Bud Grant, they're like, oh, when he walked out in that short sleeve shirt at TCF Bank Stadium when it was so cold. And it was a cool moment for all of us, I think.
I think if you look at his history and his wiki, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like he's the human form of Forrest Gump. He did so much, and he's been everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean, he has an NBA championship, right? And he coached CFL championship teams. When you've learned about your grandpa, or you've heard stories, what was most surprising to you to learn?
Well, I just found out a couple of years ago that he played for the Eagles back in the day. I had no idea. I was like, you played basketball and you played for the Eagles. I knew about all the Winnipeg stuff because he loved talking about Canada. My dad was born up in Winnipeg when he was up there. And so it's amazing to see just this array of all the things that he did. I mean, he was a fantastic baseball player. He was a fantastic basketball player. He coached and played football in so many different areas. I was actually able to go up to Winnipeg a couple of years ago and see the statue that they have outside of the stadium out there. And it was cool just to explore the town and explore Winnipeg, because this is a place that he loves a lot, and he loved being there, and a big part of his career was there. And so it's been amazing just to see all the different things that he did. He was talented in so many different ways. He was a talented athlete. He was a leader. He was a family figure for our family. He was a fantastic outdoorsman and a hunter. And he did a lot in his time. In those 95 years, he crammed a lot in there. And it's cool to see. And not a lot of people get their grandparents' lives documented the way that we do. And so I'm super grateful to be able to show my kids and my family, like, hey, this was your great grandpa. And these are all the amazing things that he did. And to be able to kind of have those memories enshrined forever is pretty amazing. And I know not a lot of people can say that. And I think that we're very grateful that we have that opportunity to have that.
Did you ever hunt or fish with him?
No. No, I guess I fished with him. He has a little lake out there in Gordon, and he'd take me fishing out on the pontoon boat, but I never went hunting. But a lot of my cousins have with him. They would go up every fall and go deer hunting or all those different times. Not that I'm an expert on it by any means, but yeah, we'd go out fishing on Grandpa's little pontoon boat, and he'd have a bunch of reels and hooks and fishing line in the basement and nets, and he had like a little area at the cabin where he would just kind of keep fish, like I don't even know what they're called, but you'd get a net and he'd be like, oh, well, that's that fish, and we caught it this time. And so it was fun to learn a little bit about the outdoors for him, just because I'm not that much of a hunting and fishing kind of a person, but a lot of people in my family are, and I know that they appreciated that quality time with him a lot.
I know even from this interview, you can tell just how important family was to him. The number is just incredible. The generations, how many kids, how many grandkids, how many great-grandkids?
So there's 6 kids total, and then they all had kids. I believe there are 11 or 12 grandkids, or probably more than that. There's between 50 or 60 of us total in the family, and I've lost track because there's the kids, and then there's the grandkids, and there's great-grandkids, and there's spouses, and there's ex-spouses, and there's, I mean, as any big family has in it, but there's a lot of us to keep track of. And when we would get together for Christmas, that was when you would really see how big our family was. My grandma loved nothing more than Christmas. And my grandma Pat, my grandpa would cry every time he talked about her, just because he loved her so much. And she was the true matriarch of our family. I mean, my grandpa he was the big figure in a lot of people's lives, but in our family, it was Grandma. Grandma was the shining star in our family, and he'd be the first to tell you that too. And Christmas was so important for us to get together because that was my grandma's favorite holiday. She had the village that she would set up in the trees with all the ornaments, and everyone would make sure that they got a gift. Everyone had something to open up during Christmas. And I think she loved it so much is because that was the time where she could see everyone and catch up with everyone and look around and see the things that they created and see the legacy that they created of their family. So Christmas was a really special time for us, always. And it was always at the same house, even during the pandemic, and we gathered around on hay bales and masks on and around a fire, and we were singing Christmas carols because we do Christmas every year at Grandpa's house, and that's not changing. So who knows what the future will bring, but that was always what it was every year.
I remember seeing the photo, I think maybe it was on one of your social media sites, and everybody's in the backyard and a person is thinking, wow, what a large family.
Huge. It just, when you get all of us in there, and I remember when I was little, I was like, wow, our family is really big. And now all my cousins have had multiple children. And then it's wild to see us all together in a room because there's so many of us, but so many generations. And we've all kind of stuck around in the Minnesota area too. We're all pretty much located in the western suburbs, except for a couple of us that have ventured off. But we all kind of, I think, have a love for the state and this area. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with Grandpa and has to do with the way that we grew up and the appreciation that we have for this area and each other.
And you mentioned your grandma, Pat. She passed away in 2009, correct?
I was in middle school when she passed. And she, like I said, she was the rock of our family. She had Parkinson's. She battled Parkinson's for a very long time. But she was one of the smartest people that you'd ever meet. I remember my dad would bring me over to their house and she'd help me with homework, my history homework, because she was just so smart about these certain things. And she was amazing. She was very special to all of us in our family. And that was our kind of big first loss that we had in our family. Since then, it was my grandma and then my dad who passed away. And we had another uncle that passed away a couple of years before that. But we haven't lost a lot of people in our family. So Grandpa, although he was 95, it still kind of took a lot of us a lot, just because we haven't had a lot of grief in our family, I guess.
And you mentioned in his last years, he had a partner also named Pat?
Yep. So after my grandma passed, he met a partner named Pat and he called her Special Pat. And she definitely was special. She was a little younger than him, but they had great adventures. They went on vacations, and she's so special to our family in a lot of ways. And I remember that was a conversation after my grandma passed was, well, as Grandpa gets older, we're going to have to help him in a lot of ways. And she was not only a partner for him, but she got him up and moving, and she got him up to the cabin, and they'd go on appearances and they'd go out on adventures together and go fishing and go hunting. And she is a wonderful person and a wonderful partner to him. And she loved him. She still loves him a lot.
For Grandma Pat and for Special Pats, were they from this area at all?
My grandma Pat, they met when they were down at the Twin Cities for school. My grandma and my grandpa met when they were both attending the University of Minnesota down there. And then Special Pat, she's from down in the Mankato area. They would kind of go back and forth between Mankato and Bloomington and Gordon, and they spent a lot of time together.
I have to ask, is there anyone in the family that's not a Vikings fan?
I don't know if that'd be allowed. No, I mean, my grandpa, he was never the kind of person that's like, you have to be a fan of the Vikings. I mean, I think all of us were, just because of our family ties.
That's fair. How about outside of football in the outdoors? Did your grandpa have any hidden talents or anything like that? Or are there things people would be surprised to know that he was interested in?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to things that people might not know about him, I think he was known for this very stoic outward exterior with the serious pictures of him on the sidelines of the stadiums and coaching the games and things like that. But I think he had a lot more emotions than people necessarily realized. I mean, he was funny. Like, he would crack jokes and he would laugh, and he had a good wit about him too. But he also was very in touch with other emotions. There are times where I remember he would cry and he would get emotional, especially during Christmas time with our family. But one of the biggest times was during the national anthem, during sports games. I remember there was one time we were at, I think it was a Vikings game or a different game, and we all were singing the national anthem, hands over our hearts, hats off. And I look over and Grandpa's crying. There's just tears running down his face. And he had a love for this country. He was a veteran. And he had a love for the game and the appreciation of this country that I think a lot of people don't realize. I mean, that's why when he coached his Purple People Eaters, they were in the formation when they would sit there and they'd stand and they would put their hands over their heart and they would sing the national anthem. And that was just an expectation on his team. But emotions, like he got emotional in a couple different areas. And I think that's something that not a lot of people would expect from him just because he has that stoic presence about him in a lot of people's minds. But I mean, when my grandma passed, when my dad passed, situations like that, obviously those emotions show through again. But definitely during the national anthem. I mean, that's how we opened his funeral, was singing of the national anthem. And there were American flags everywhere just because that was something that filled him with a lot of pride to be a veteran and to be someone who cared about the flag and things like that.
I know you were telling me a little bit before we started this interview, those final days. I think people would take comfort in the fact that he wasn't suffering.
No, he wasn't sick. He wasn't suffering. He was 95 years old, and I think it was just his time to go. And when you live 95 years, that's a full life. That is a life where you get to do a lot, and he definitely did. But no suffering. He wasn't sick. He wasn't in a hospital or anything like that. So it was a shock to some of us, but I think it was just the way that he would want it to go.
You know, we've talked about legacy too, and certainly, I mean, he's on the Vikings Mount Rushmore and all of his sports accomplishments. But to you and to the family, what do you think his legacy is as a sports figure and more importantly, as the patriarch of the family?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is someone that really held our family together in a lot of ways. I mean, there's so many of us, and a lot of times when families get that big, they break off into different facets and different kind of subsections of it, but he's the reason why we kind of all stayed together over these years. And he is, like I said, he's grandpa to a lot of us. He's not this big coach. He's not this Minnesota Vikings figure. He's just grandpa, but he's an amazing person to learn from. I am speaking from personal experience. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to learn from him. And I'm sure a lot of my aunts and uncles and my cousins can relate to that as well, just to be able to sit down and have that alone time with grandpa, because with that many people, you don't get a lot of it. And I remember whenever I was at the cabin, I would always make time to go sit. He has these chairs right out by looking over the dock and looking over the lake. And I would just go sit there and we'd talk. We'd talk about what's happening in life. We'd talk about his memories of this area up here in the Northland. And those are the memories that really are special to me. And I know that a lot of people in my family have similar situations where you can just get that alone time with grandpa, because when there's a lot of us, it's hard to do sometimes, but those are special. But he will always be a legacy and someone that I will look to for guidance. And like I said, not a lot of people have their grandparents documented in the way that we do. And so I can continue learning from him as I go through my career, as I go through my life, and to be able to kind of paint that picture for my family in the future. I mean, my brother and sister are really young. I guess not anymore. They're 17 and 14, but they seem young to me. But they kind of are still learning about who grandpa was too, and who grandpa, all the things that he did and the things that he accomplished. And I think that he'll forever be kind of someone that we look up to in our family for sure.
Thank you for all of this.
Yeah.
Is there anything I didn't ask you or anything else you'd like to mention?
I was the first blue-eyed grandchild in the family, fun fact. My grandpa had blue eyes, and my other grandpa had blue eyes. And on all of us, I was the first one. And I got that from him, which I always felt like connected to him with me. But no, this has been great. I appreciate you doing this. I know that he loved it up here, and he had a special place in his heart for this area in northern Wisconsin, and fishing and hunting and charter fishing out on Lake Superior. And he did everything up here as far as outdoors go and as far as sports go too, growing up. So I think that he would really appreciate this for sure.
Thanks again to Natalie Grant, and thanks to you for listening to Archive Dive. New episodes are available monthly at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, email Maria at mlockwood@superiortelegram.com. Maria returns next month for part 2 of our series, as she'll be joined by another NNN alum, longtime sportscaster, and currently a communicating arts senior lecturer at the University of Wisconsin-Superior, Tom Hansen, as they dive into more about the great Bud Grant.